And so one of the questions we were asked is how effectively do you co-report progress towards IEP goals and student standards on IEPs? Well, again, it's the divide and conquer rule. If there are two of you in the classroom and one of you is the content expert and one is working with students' more social emotional needs, it only makes sense that one would report progress towards academics, the other might do social emotional. If you have equal roles, again, data-driven instruction. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to take data. Tuesday, Thursday, you're going to take data. Then we're going to summarize our data for the IEP meeting. What do I mean by data? Well, perhaps we're going to pick one academic goal on Monday and Wednesday, a different academic goal on Tuesday, Thursday. On Friday, we're going to do a summary of social emotional goals. Now we have a logical way. We have divvied up the responsibility and we have ongoing progress. It can be as simple as writing in a notebook, writing it down on an iPad, can even be taking video images to remind you of the things, here's their work sample, that you want to write up in those summaries. But again, co-reporting is no different than co-grading. We divide and conquer the responsibilities. So how does a strong grading policy look in an inclusive school? Well, it goes back to one of those core values, consistent but flexible. We find in schools where co-teaching, collaboration, inclusion, whatever you want to use as a term, makes it easier for kids with disabilities to be included, has a policy that is consistent but flexible across the school. And it's a policy that communicates not just numbers or not just letters, but it communicates clearly what a kid can and cannot do. Assessments are something we should be doing ongoing and daily, and well as cumulative, but grades are a summary to help kids and families know what they can and cannot do. So having a consistent policy that focuses on what kids can and cannot do is truly the point of grading. So should an F be graded as a 0 or a 50? Well, let's think about that for a minute. If the gap from an F is from 0 to 59, and from a D is 60 to 69, doesn't it only make sense that we would narrow the gap for failure because too many kids live so far down in that gap they can never get to the other side of the fence? And so my answer to that question is I would definitely not give a 0. Matter of fact, I might not give zeros at all. I might even give 50s, but make it a non-grade. However, better idea. Instead of grading kids with numeracy, numbers, why not make it skill-based? This is what a kid can and cannot do. That's the real point of grading. And so does a 50 tell you what a kid can and cannot do, or a 0? The kid turned nothing in, it might be a 0. But some teachers say, well, a kid turned nothing in, it's a 50. A kid turned in their name and one problem. It's a 59. Is it a 60? Is it a 65? Again, numbers don't tend to communicate what kids can and cannot do. With the adoption of the new Common Core standards, it makes a lot more sense to take those standards, and if you've got to tie it to a letter grade, this is an A. But this A means your child still cannot do this, but they can do 92% of things. These are the things they can do. And that's really the point. Modified assignments. Well, a couple ways to consider. One, my favorite, is do a portfolio. Again, have a rubric base that if you do these 10 products, you get an A. This kid does these 10 products, they get an A. Again, we now have a modified rubric communicating what an A is or is not for each child. But how do you actually turn an assignment if you're caught in the letter grade world that is modified? What we recommend is that you take that graded assignment and you look at what the student does based on the content standard and their IEP. If on their IEP it says they can have the test read aloud and they still do well, they get an A. If they had the test read aloud and they struggled, was there anything else on their IEP that you did or did not do? They need a scribe. Again, reporting what kids can and cannot do is the point of grades. So should a modified test be on a rubric scale of 1 to 4 be a 4? If the modification is based on what you've been asked to do as part of the IEP. If it's just we're doing it because we wanted to, again, what are you trying to communicate? What a kid can and cannot do. And that's the point of grading. So one of the questions is, can a significantly modified piece of work still be considered a 3, which means the child is proficient with the standard? Again, I think that if the child is not proficient with that standard at a 3, can you talk about what standard they are proficient with? Because if we gave the kid a modified assignment, it's because that's a part of what's on their IEP. And we're trying to communicate the proficiency of a standard you want the student to do. So one of the questions is, how do strong inclusive schools communicate grades to children and to their families? Well, the first answer is that's exactly what they do. They do use grading to communicate to students and families. There's 3 different ways you might consider. One, using some kind of rubric. And again, you can have a modified rubric. This rubric represents the student's A. This rubric represents the student's A. It never says that those rubrics have to be compared. Second thing that you can consider doing is you could have a portfolio assessment where you actually show work samples. They could be auditory work samples, visual work samples, digital work samples. Again, with a tool like an iPad, an iPhone, any kind of thing that will take a picture, you can actually have a digital sample. So this student's family gets a report card that's letter grade. This one gets one of images, again, depending on what the goals of the students are. But the last thing is, that's truly the third thing, is making sure you communicate. One of my favorite ways to communicate is to have students with disabilities and without have student-parent conferences. So that it's not parent-teacher, but it's student-parent conferences where the student and the parent talk to each other and the teacher is a guide on the side. Now, I know what you're going to say. What if the parent doesn't show up? Well, we do have schools that I've worked with that's happened. What they do is they have community volunteers or they have another teacher, but that the student gets the opportunity to communicate that they know what they can and cannot do, which again is the true point of grading.